So originally, when I described this cover of the art scroll Tehillim, I thought here, in the midst of all of the difficulties of the world, our king is able to harmonize with all of those things and bring peace. That's what I thought, pretty much what I thought this picture. Now he's saying a different thing, he said, in this introduction, that our king is actually a conductor. He comes and he understands he has the burdens of the entire universe on his shoulders, and he understands what he needs to do with it. And we find this in the Sefer, which we call Tehillim, and the Gentiles call it Psalms. One way or another, these are the songs of our King, and they are meant to harmonize nature, period. Let's go over and read a little bit more. We are in the introduction here, and it's really quite interesting. Tremendous background. I'm so impressed by Rabbi Foyer. Ruddy, but with beautiful eyes. Some 3.5 centuries after Sinai. That's a long time. The United States is only approximately 250 years old at this time of this year. And so this is 350 years in the life cycle of the Jewish people. So 3.5 centuries after Sinai, Israel entered a period of renewal, the era of Samuel. For 1 full year prior to Samuel's birth, a bas kol, heavenly voice, people say it's an echo, continually heralded the arrival of this great soul. In Samuel's time, prophecy flourished and through the land all through the land, and as the groups of his disciples learned under his tutelage to draw close to God, the new vistas of clear vision, which opened up in those days, are best described in the following verse. I'll read it in Hebrew, we'll translate it as he does better than me. B'fanei Yisrael, Komar ha'ir v'lechtach l'drosh Elokem, l'chu v'nelcho ad ha'roeh. Let's go to the seer, ki l'no'avich v'chayom yikro l'fanim ha'roeh. In earlier times in Israel, during the time of Samuel, when a man went to inquire of God, so he would say, "Come and let us go to the seer," for that is what the prophet was called in earlier times, the seer. Samuel himself accepted the unprecedented title, introducing himself to Saul, Anochi haroeh, I am the seer. However, the sages tell us that God found fault with Samuel's sweeping depiction of himself. Was it he who saw? Wasn't it God who showed him? Samuel should have made perfectly clear what he knew in his heart and expected his listeners to realize as well. I am he who sees what God shows him. This is the Rav Gifter. Rav Gifter was the Rosh Yeshiva in Telz in Cleveland. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Samuel, "You call yourself the seer? I will show you something which you will not be able to see." When did God show Samuel this? When he sent him to anoint David, as we may be going to see. Indeed, Samuel knew full well that the source of the seer's clear vision is not his eyes, but his ears. He who cannot listen cannot see. Samuel knew all too well that God had rejected Saul, the first king, whom he himself had anointed, because he allowed himself to be enticed and entrapped by his eyes. Saul saw the handsome animal of Amalek. This is the story in the book of Samuel, and spared them for future offerings, rather than destroy them immediately as God had commanded. And Samuel said, "Does Hashem desire burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as he desires obeying the voice of Hashem?" Behold, obedience is better than sacrifice. To listen surpasses the fat of rams. Now we have here the seed of Ruth. What is this about? God rejected the house of Saul and commanded Samuel to anoint a new king. He directed the prophet to a family which had long dedicated its efforts to regaining Adam's pristine purity, the family of Jesse. In Hebrew it's Yishai, the son of Oved, the son of Ruth. Ruth is a whole other story. Ruth's son was Oved. He was called Oved because he served God with a full heart. And Oved bore Jesse, Yishai, who was also called Nachash, the serpent. Many days passed before the angel of death could find a cause to take Jesse's soul away, for this man was free of all sin and guilt. God remembered the Nachash who persuaded Adam and Eve to eat of the tree of knowledge. He remembered that. Because of that sin, all men are condemned to die. And that was the only cause of righteous Jesse's death. So in other words, he was so perfect he should have been allowed to live forever. But we all have this concept of the Nachash. I just was wondering as he's saying this, just tremendous ideas, but what's the metaphor here? This perfect man became known as the snake. So I don't see the metaphor right now, but let's move on. Samuel arrived at the house of Jesse and was instructed or introduced to his 7 fine sons. When the seer beheld Eliab, the eldest, he was greatly impressed and exclaimed, Ak neged Hashem Mashiach, so surely Hashem's anointed is before him. Eliab seemed to be an aristocrat of noble bearing, a leader possessed of discipline and self-control. But hidden from Samuel's eyes, Eliab was a man of violence, given to bursts of unbridled anger. So he was a Gevurah in Pesachim, quoting Shmuel, the book of Samuel. V'yom Hashem al Shmuel al talbet amarehu ve'al gevohu kumaso ki ma'astihu ki lo asher v'lo asher yireh ha'adach v'ki ha'adam yireh le'enayim v'Hashem yireh b'lev, because of men. I'll read it in English. I'm going to skip the Hebrew from that one. It says, and Hashem said unto Samuel, look not at his appearance or at his high stature, for I have rejected him. Things are not as man sees them. The real truth is not the way we see things. For man sees only what appears before his eyes, but Hashem looks into the heart. He is the one. One by one, God disqualified all 7 of Jesse's sons. But there was one more son, the 8th. Now what about him? He was a mere shepherd. No one had appreciated this son. No one even knew him well. So little did he seem suited for royalty that he wasn't even invited to come to welcome the seer. But now his brothers rejected. This son was summoned home from the flocks. And he was red. He was ruddy, red of color, with beautiful eyes. When Samuel first saw our Messiah is a redhead. What's the significance of the word red? When Samuel first laid his eyes on David, he was alarmed. He said, this ruddy fellow, all red, is a bloody killer. I can imagine that he's full of freckles. You just get people that just are full of freckles. But the Holy One, blessed be he, allayed Samuel's fears and said, no, this one is different. Because he's in Yefei Anayim, he has beautiful eyes. Esav murders to satisfy his own desires, but David slays his foes only upon the advice and guidance of a Sanhedrin. Who are the Sanhedrin? Who are the Einei Ha'Eda? They are the eyes of the congregation. In truth, Samuel's basic evaluation of David was accurate. By nature, David was inclined to violence, he was red. But by listening well to the lessons of the sages, David had refined his character. And David inquired of Hashem. David always consulted God to learn what his next step should be. He never relied on his own wisdom and ingenuity. He didn't do it himself. It was in this virtue that David surpassed Shaul in Hebrew, who acted on his own initiative. King Saul's temperament was far more suited than David's to perfection. Saul's nature was cool and subdued, not given to excess. David, however, was Admoni, ruddy, was all red and seethed with burning passions, tamed only with great effort. This is from the Or HaChaim. I'm just so impressed by Rabbi Foyer, how he puts this together. It's really beautiful. By nature, David was inclined towards cruelty. However, he disciplined himself to use his harsh streak only when necessary. In his battles against idolaters or heretics, towards his fellow Israelites, David acted only with kindness, this is according to Rambam, the Malchimoni. Let's go. It was this unique man who God designated to restore the vision of the nation. V'yom Hashem kum moshachehu ki zehu. Hashem said, arise, anoint him, for he is the one. This is Baruch Fleischman. We're listening to the life and times of our King David, and particularly in regards to his psalms, which are really all musical songs.